You really have to hear what this team encountered. If you stay with me, you will understand why I have not stood on an open dock after dark in 17 years. On August 22, 2009, in Sukkwan Bay off Hydaburg on Alaska's Prince of Wales Island, 3 members of a 5-person survey crew were dead and 1 more would be gone from this world before the decade was over. The first body pulled from the water had no salt water in the lungs. The second had no meaningful trauma. The third looked like his heart had failed in a healthy man in 38-degree rain with help still within radio range. The official explanation was boating accident, exposure, and panic. It was wrong. What comes next is the account. When the state trooper skiff nosed into the bay that morning, the tide was halfway out and the cove had gone flat as sheet metal. They found our camp stove upright on the beach. They found 1 paddle snapped clean across the grain. They found a pair of rubber boots placed side by side above the rack line, toes facing the trees, not the water, as if someone had stepped out of them and taken 1 measured stride into the air. The mud held for clear prints from those boots. The 5th should have been there. It was not. 50 yards offshore, the skiff rocked in the kelp with its motor down and its stern light still on. My name is Isaiah Kaalund. I was 58 years old that summer. I am Haida from Hydaburg, and in 2009 I had worked 24 years in marine access, shoreline mapping, and habitat survey around Prince of Wales Island. My father seined salmon in those waters. My mother's brothers cut cedar along that coast before most of the logging roads were punched through. I knew the shape of tides in Sukkwan Bay the way other men know the hallways in their own houses. Nothing had ever frightened me. That changed at Sukkwan Bay. I am speaking now because I am the last living witness who stayed to the end. The other survivor, Lena Peratrovich, died in 2017 while sorting invoices in the tribal office. She was 55. Clean bill of health the month before. Heart stopped at her desk. That is not an isolated detail. It is part of the pattern. I did not understand that in 2009. I understand it now, or enough of it to keep my own front door locked even in daylight and to leave every radio in my house turned off after sunset. Our assignment was routine on paper. We were checking old shoreline markers, eelgrass beds, and storm damage around unused fish camp structures near Sukkwan Bay and the smaller inlets feeding into it. 5 of us went out. I handled the survey notes and shore measurements. Lena Peratrovich was 47, our radio and logistics lead, with 19 years of field time and a habit of checking every battery twice. Nolan Mercer was 61, the operations director with 31 years on boats and in camps, a man who folded tarps square and expected everyone else to do the same. Maya Sato was 34, a hydrology technician with 11 years in rain and cold. Steady hands, quiet voice, never careless. Eli Varn was 23, 8 months into the job, eager, fast, and too willing to go first. We ran a 22-foot aluminum skiff with 2 fuel cans, 1 spare prop, 4 flares, 1 12-gauge, 2 VHF radios, a satellite phone that worked when the weather felt generous, and enough food for 3 nights. Our camp sat on a shelf of gravel above the tide line near the remains of an old float and piling set. Behind us stood spruce and hemlock so dense they took the light early. In front of us the bay narrowed into a trench of black water where kelp beds dragged like wet rope and a limestone cut opened under the headland. At high tide that cut filled to the lip. At low tide it breathed. Nearest immediate help was Hydaburg, 38 miles away by a bad combination of water and road if everything went right. Anything beyond that meant Ketchikan and a ferry or aircraft. We all knew those numbers. We all kept saying them because numbers make a place sound manageable. The truth was simpler. Once evening settled and the fog rolled off the water, the island pressed in from all sides. Rainforest at our backs. Tidal dark in front of us. No clean line out. The first sign came before dusk on our first day. No gulls. No ravens. No insects in the grass. In southeast Alaska you notice silence because the coast is built on noise. Even empty places tick and click and cry out. That afternoon the whole bay went still at once. Eli looked up from the marker stake he was carrying and said he could hear his own teeth. Nolan told him to stop talking like a child. 10 minutes later Maya found wet prints on the float. Bare human-shaped impressions, narrow and long, each one filled with bay water, crossing dry boards toward the pilings. They ended at open air. We explained that away because people in field camps explain things away or they stop functioning. A seal could have hauled out. Rain could have sat in the grain. One of us could have tracked water and forgotten it. Then Lena called us over to the beach grass. Eli's boots were there, set together with the socks tucked inside. Eli was 50 yards upslope, cutting flagging from a roll at that exact moment, wearing deck shoes and swearing he had left the boots by the stove in a heap with the rest of his gear. Nolan told him he was trying to be funny. Eli did not smile. That night, the silence came back just before 10. We had the stove going and freeze-dried meals in hand. The rain eased. The water flattened. Then every small sound went out of the bay at once. No drip from cedar. No wing beat. No hiss from the tide. Eli stood up first. He said someone was walking on the float. Nolan took the flashlight and went down with him. I followed 10 paces back. Maya stayed with Lena at the tent line. The beam crossed the old boards. Nothing. Then Eli said very quietly that he could hear his mother calling him from under the dock. I remember that sentence because it should have broken the tension. His mother had been dead 2 years and buried in Klawak. Nolan told him to shut his mouth. Eli stepped past the beam, toward the last piling, head bent like he was trying to listen through the wood. I saw the back of his rain jacket. I saw his right hand lift, palm open, as if he meant to steady himself on something just below us. Then the light went out for half a second. When it came back, Eli was gone. No splash, no cry, no sound of falling through. Gone. We spent the next 40 minutes on our knees with lamps, pulling the tide line, calling his name, checking under the float and through the kelp. Nature stayed silent the whole time. Nolan kept working with the hard, clipped voice he used when a problem could still be solved by labor. Lena handled the radio. Maya held the second flashlight and shook so hard the beam tapped across the pilings. I found Eli at 11:07 p.m. He was wedged in the kelp 10 yards from shore, face up, eyes open, rain on his cheeks. His jacket was soaked through. His mouth was closed. When we rolled him, a thread of water ran out of one ear and that was all. The doctor later told the troopers he had not drowned. We should have left at first light. That is what people say when they hear this. We planned to. The skiff motor turned twice and locked. The pull cord on the backup starter frayed in Nolan's hand. The satellite phone showed charge and no signal. The VHF carried our voice out but received only static back. At 7:20 a.m. Lena got 3 seconds of response from Hydaburg, enough to tell them we had a dead man and mechanical trouble. The voice on the other end told her to repeat. Then the radio emitted a low wet crackle, and through it I heard Eli say my name. Lena heard it too. She put the handset down on the cooler as if it had burned her. Nolan said radio bleed, crossed wires, grief. He did not believe his own explanation. I could tell because he kept looking at the bay instead of at us. We laid Eli in a zipped sleeping bag beneath a tarp and took inventory. 2 fuel cans, 6 shells, 3 flares, 1 marine battery showing weak charge. Enough water for another day and a half if we stopped cooking. Nolan wanted to stay close and wait for help. Maya wanted to haul gear inland and cut a line to the road spur. I wanted all of us away from the dock before dark. By noon, we found the second sign that ended argument. Mud at the edge of the cove held Nolan's boot prints from our search the night before. For deep heel marks, 1 partial toe, then nothing. The prints stopped in a clear stretch of flat mud 6 feet from the water. No drag mark, no turn, no slide. It was as if his weight had been taken off the earth between one step and the next. Maya crouched there for a long time without speaking. When she rose, she took a folded paper from the chest pocket of her rain shell and asked me if I had ever heard the word skana from the old people. I had, not in that bay and not spoken lightly. Maya told me she had asked an elder in Hydaburg about Sukkwan the week before because one of the carving men told her there were places along that coast where you did not answer voices coming off the tide. The elder had written a note in pencil on lined paper and told her to keep it in her pocket if we camped near a cut in the rock. She handed it to me. The note said, "If the water speaks with a human voice after the birds go quiet, Do not answer it. Put copper in your mouth. Face the trees. Give it no name. In old speech they call it skana chinga, the one that comes up black. I still have that note. Nolan read it and said he would not run a field operation by campfire religion. Those were his words. He said the proper job was to get the skiff running, preserve Eli's body, and meet the responders when they came. Maya said the old speech existed before our charts and engines and that maybe we should respect a rule we had been given for free. Nolan took the note from me, folded it once, and put it on the camp table like a receipt. That is when I knew he would be the next to go, though I would not have admitted it even to myself. The second night began with low fog and a tide that came in faster than the chart had suggested. We set the shotgun beside the tent. Lena kept the radio on scan. Maya cut small tabs from a copper grounding strip in the repair kit and handed one to each of us. We placed them between gum and cheek because no one wanted to bite down and look foolish. No one laughed. At 9:14 the silence returned. It was not absence. It was pressure. The bay held its breath and made us do the same. Then we heard Nolan from the float. He had gone to check the mooring line 5 minutes earlier. His voice came up calm through the fog. He said he had found our missing fuel can drifting near the pilings and needed a hand. Lena moved first. I grabbed her sleeve and said, "Wait." Maya pointed toward the beach. The actual fuel can sat where it had sat all afternoon. Red plastic, cap tied with blue cord. Nolan called again. Same words, same pace, no variation at all. Like a line replayed through bad speakers. Maya said, "Do not answer him." Lena started crying without making noise. I do not mean she broke down. I mean tears ran off her chin while she held herself rigid and listened. The voice called a third time. Then it changed. It became Maya's voice asking for me. Then my older brother's voice, dead since 1998. Then Eli's. The fog lifted just enough for me to see a shape moving between the outer pilings, too high above the water for a seal, too narrow through the head and shoulders for a bear, one arm or fin or length of itself laid briefly against the timber as if feeling the grain. I never saw all of it. I saw wet shine. I saw a long rise where a back should not have been. I saw height. Then Nolan screamed once from farther out in the dark than any man could have waited on that tide. We fired one flare over the bay and the red light showed the water boiling in a circle 30 yards from shore. Nolan surfaced inside that light on his knees in water that should have been over his head, mouth open, hands lifted, not thrashing, as if someone beneath him held him upright by the ribs. The flare died. The dark took him back. We found his coat the next morning folded over the crossbeam of the float, dry inside, buttons fastened. At that point we abandoned the skiff, lashed what gear we could carry, and pushed inland toward an old logging spur Maya had marked on the map. We had one body under tarp, one man gone, one radio, one shotgun for shells, and less than a gallon of water. The forest should have felt safer. It did not. The quiet followed us under the trees. Twice we heard movement pacing us down by the shoreline where the woods opened to the bay. Not crashing, not brush breaking. Coordinated movement stopping when we stopped. Beginning again when we began. We made it to a collapsed shed by late afternoon on the third day, maybe a quarter mile from the headland cave. That was where Maya told us the rest. The elder had said skana chinga did not take flesh first. It took breath, memory, and the part of a person that let the heart keep time. Bodies were left behind only when needed. It chose those who answered, those who mocked, and those who spoke the names of the taken back toward the water. It had been known before the missionaries, before the Russians, before the first mapped canneries. There were marks cut into the limestone above the cave mouth older than the village church in Hydaburg. There had been years when no one camped there at all. Night fell before we could move again. The shed had 3 standing walls, cedar wrought under the sill, and a door that would not close. We blocked it with toolboxes. Lena kept whispering the radio frequencies under her breath like prayer. Maya sat beside Eli's covered body and held the copper tab between her teeth. I checked the lock on that broken door so many times I wore a raw line into my palm from the latch. That is how I tell you what that place did to us. Not with grand words. With hands, habits, and the fact that I have not slept near an uncurtained window since. The silence came for the last time just after midnight. A knock sounded on the outside wall. 3 measured taps. Then Maya's mother, who was alive and living in Seattle, called her by her childhood name from the dark below the window frame. Maya shut her eyes. Lena almost answered. I pressed the copper so hard into my gums I tasted blood. The door lifted inward 1 inch against the toolboxes and settled back. Then came the smell of cold iron and low-tide mud. Something moved along the wall with a dragging, deliberate patience, finding gaps, learning the boards. It made a new sound then, one I still hear when rain runs through gutters. Not a growl, not a human word. A wet intake followed by a pulse like air being drawn through a chest too large for the room. The lantern flame bent toward the door. Eli's covered body collapsed under the tarp as though the bones had gone out of it. Lena made a small sound in her throat. Maya looked at me and said, "Face the trees, not the door. Do not answer anything, no matter who it sounds like." The rear wall of the shed had slats missing between studs. Beyond them stood black spruce. I turned toward those trees because Maya told me to and because I had run out of ideas that belonged to men like Nolan. Lena turned too late. She looked back when her own son called for her from the doorway. I heard her answer yes before she clamped her mouth shut. The copper strip fell from her lips to the floor. Something hit the wall from outside. The whole structure lurched. Maya shoved Lena behind me and fired the last flare through the opening where a board had rotted away. In that red wash I saw only pieces. A shoulder rising above the door lintel. Skin or hide slick as if varnished by salt. A head tilted wrong for anything I knew. Not fish, not man, not bear. The features never settling in one shape long enough for me to keep them. One hand on the frame, if it was a hand, with fingers too long and jointed backward at the tips. Behind it, water hanging in the air in strands, though we were uphill from the tide. Then Maya ran at the door with the shotgun held crosswise and drove it into the gap to pin the frame shut. She bought us seconds. That is all. Lena and I dragged ourselves through the back slats and out into the brush while the shed cracked behind us. Maya said my name once. Then she told me not to turn around. I obeyed because the note had said to give it no name and because her voice still sounded like her own. Halfway up the rise, another Maya called from below and told me she was hurt and alone. That second voice came too quickly after the first. That was the voice meant for me. I kept my face to the trees. Lena stumbled beside me, one hand over her mouth, making no sound at all. We reached the road spur at dawn and flagged down a Forest Service truck 6 miles east. Rescue went back in force. They recovered Eli and what they could identify as Nolan. They found Maya's parka hanging from a spruce branch 9 feet off the ground. Zipper closed, cuffs turned out neatly. They did not find Maya. They did not find tracks around that tree, though the ground was soft enough to hold the boot treads of every rescuer who came later. The trooper report said disorientation, accident, probable drowning. The medical examiner could not certify drowning for Eli and wrote that Nolan's cardiac collapse was inconsistent with the circumstances. Those lines were buried in the file. For years I tried to leave it there. Then in 2015 I began reading older records in Juneau and Ketchikan and in a church basement archive near Klawak. Summer of 1931, 2 cannery workers missing from a tender anchored on the same coast. Their clothing found folded on deck. In 1974, a Forest Service employee named Garrett Madsen reported voices from the water in a field notebook and was dead 3 years later of abrupt heart failure at 39. In 1988, a skiff near Hydaburg came back empty but for neatly placed gloves and 1 wet footprint on a dry bench seat. Every case had a different label. None of them matched until you laid the details side by side. That was when I went back to the elder's family. He had died by then. His grandson brought out a cedar box with copied notes inside. Some in English, some in old speech, some taken down from people who did not want them read outside the family. The rule was repeated in every decade. Do not answer a voice from open water after the world goes quiet. Put copper in your mouth. Face the trees or the landward stone. Never call back the taken. The paper said those who survived first contact often died years later when the heart lost time without warning. Lena lasted 8 years. I have lasted longer. I do not think that means I was stronger. Prince of Wales Island is still open today. People fish those bays, paddle those coves, rent the cabins, photograph the kelp at low tide, and go home with stories about whales, rain, and clean air. Most of them have the trip they expected. Most of them will never notice anything except how wide the coast feels and how fast the weather can move. That is true. I am not telling you the island is waiting for every visitor. I am telling you the pattern stays hidden because almost everyone leaves before the conditions line up. But on nights when the tide is filling a cut in the limestone, and the birds stop all at once, and a voice reaches you from the dark water using the name only family uses, that is when the old rule matters. If you answer, it has chosen you. If you look back after someone you love calls from the shoreline where no person is standing, it has chosen you. Cases like ours never get connected because one death becomes drowning, another becomes weather, another becomes heart failure 5 or 8 years later in an office far from salt water. So if you ever find yourself on that coast after dark, and the bay goes flat, and the silence drops over the trees like a lid, do not be polite. Do not answer. Do not investigate. Face the land. Keep your mouth closed. Let the voice use every name it knows and give it nothing back. I survived because I kept my face to the trees and never answered when it used Maya's voice from the water. That is the part that keeps me awake at night.